There is no question that what Jimmy Savile did and the way the BBC behaved in the years that the culture and practices of the BBC seemed to allow Jimmy Savile to do what he did will raise questions of trust for us and reputation for us. There is no question about that. This is a gravely serious matter, and one cannot look back at it with anything other than horror, frankly, that his activities went on as long as they did, undetected. And of course that is a matter of grave regret to me, and something that the BBC and I need to demonstrate an absolute determination here and now to do everything we can to put right. There's no doubt about that at all in my mind, and I am determined to do that.
We know enough now to know that there was a culture of unacceptable and inappropriate behaviour at the BBC. Well, it wasn't just, I mean, Jimmy Savile was at the far extreme of that, but it wasn't just Jimmy Savile. It seems perfectly clear. We've had people coming out on a virtually daily basis to talk of things that have happened to them, being groped on air by other people. So this is not just particularly, this is a culture at the BBC. So how satisfied are you that this was a problem of culture within the BBC?
Well, I'm convinced it must have been a problem of culture inside the BBC. I don't believe that somebody like Jimmy Savile could do what he did without there being a broader cultural problem. And that's why we were so careful to specify culture and practices in the terms of reference for Dame Janet's review. And if I could just distinguish between, and I think it's important to distinguish between criminal allegations, criminal behaviour, criminal activity of the sort that is alleged about Jimmy Savile, and sexual harassment. And it could well be that all these things are on the same, they're part of the same culture. And that's something I hope Dame Janet will give us an understanding of. But it is important to recognise the difference between direct criminal allegations and allegations of sexual harassment.
How does the BBC deal with allegations of sexual harassment?
Well, we have a number of... do you mean today? Today?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. We have a number of routes available to people who need to address a complaint of sexual harassment. They can speak to their line manager. They can speak to the HR department. We have a whistleblowing line available if they don't regard any of those things as possible. Of course, if they're a member of a trade union, they could go to the trade union and expect to be represented there.
And how does that differ from how the BBC dealt with these things in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s?
Well, I don't believe there was a culture of awareness as there is today, that you have to have your systems built to be ready to deal with allegations of sexual harassment. I'm not sure that in the 60s and 70s people would have known what to do with an allegation of sexual harassment. And perhaps more worryingly, I'm not sure in the 60s and 70s that they would have felt there was anything they could do. And what we strive to do today is to be really clear to our staff that there are various routes and options available to them if they need to make if they need to make a complaint about sexual harassment. And those options have been set out twice in emails. I think I might have said twice, once certainly, and I think it was referenced in another all-staff email since this Savile crisis began, to make sure people know where to go if they have a complaint to make.
How many sexual harassment complaints have there been at the BBC since each year since the 1960s?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Davis, but I'm very happy to try and get the answer for you, of course.
Have you not looked into how many complaints have been about sexual harassment at the BBC? Is that not a bit of interest to you as the Director General?
It's very much of interest to me at the moment to ensure that the existing structures are in place to deal with new allegations of sexual harassment. That's what I've been focusing on. But I'm very happy, of course, to get hold of any data I can to answer your question.
But I'm just surprised that yet that isn't something that you've wanted to find out for yourself without me having to ask you. I would have thought that one of the first things that you would have wanted to do was to say, well, hold on a minute, we've got a problem here. This is clearly a cultural problem. Well, let's go back and let me see how many complaints we've been having at the BBC about this.
No, I have made inquiries about the current scale of activity and complaints, but I haven't made those historical inquiries.
So how many complaints have there been in the last couple of years then?
No, I can't give you a firm answer to that question.
So you haven't even looked at what the current situation is?
I've asked whether or not there are significant numbers, and I've been assured there are not significant numbers at the moment. But
what's a significant number? I mean, surely one complaint of sexual harassment is too many in the BBC. So I mean, what when you ask for other significant number, what sort of number did you have in mind?
Well, to be honest, I would be worried if there were anything in excess of 5 a year.
So up to 5's okay?
No, up to 5 is not okay. I'm not suggesting that for a moment.
You are aware of further allegations of this sort of unacceptable behaviour in the BBC. Can you just confirm that you believe that to be between 5 and 10?
No, I must clarify what I said there. My guess is that an institution of the BBC's size might expect to have that many in a year, but the number of allegations we're looking at the moment is, and this is historical, I would have thought between 8 and 10.
Could I just that's 8 to 10 individuals, not individual cases?
In individuals.
Could I just reassure you on that point as well? If any of the current allegations are current and involve anybody still working at the BBC, we've taken steps to make sure that
they go straight to the police.
That they go straight to the police, and that if anybody is still operating in areas where they can come into contact with children or young people or people who might be the targets of abuse, that action is taken about that. There hasn't been a need to take that action so far, but every case is scrutinised very carefully to make sure that we cannot be in a position where someone who's been accused of any form of sexual abuse is still working in a situation which will allow them to continue to do so. That's being done actively.
That's what I meant by tracking. We're collating all any names there are centrally. We're making an immediate assessment of whether there is a potential criminal dimension and returning those immediately to the police.
That's negated the question that I had on that particular issue. In your 23 years at the corporation, with your vast experience of current affairs and documentaries, are you aware of any investigation that linked high-ranking politicians and or their advisors to child abuse?
I can't recall that. Again, my colleague David Jordan in editorial policy may have seen something of that kind. I can't recall anything of that kind. I came away from the panorama firmly of the view that investigation, even if it, in the judgment of the editor, it wasn't ready for transmission at the point he was looking at it, should have been allowed to continue.
Why did it take 3 weeks for the BBC to realise that the account given by Mr. Rippon was inaccurate and incomplete?
When you want to find out why a programme has done an investigation, in my long experience of the BBC, the person you go to is the editor of the programme containing that investigation, or the commissioning editor of that investigation, because they are the people, they know why, they should know why they commissioned the piece, and they should have the most complete picture of why they commissioned the piece. Now, what became clear to us after the blog was published was that that what had happened on Newsnight was that there was a significant, it seemed, difference of opinion between the people working on the investigation and the editor, Peter Rippon, who commissioned the investigation. And that difference of opinion was made clear to me relatively soon after the blog was published, the following week. And at that point I thought, well, I although I would normally absolutely expect to be able to get from the editor of a programme a complete and full picture of what had been going on that programme, I thought I needed to get to the bottom of why there seemed to be a difference of opinion. And there definitely seems to me to have been a breakdown in communication on Newsnight in that regard.
So what did you do to get to the bottom of it?
So I asked my colleague Ken Macquarie, who sits on the BBC's management board, to speak to the two journalists involved to get a sense of what they thought had happened.
But this was nearly 3 weeks ago, and the BBC only changed its story yesterday in light of the Panorama programme. So
Ken Macquarie spoke to the two journalists in question, and then wrote me a note, and this takes us towards the end of the week ending the 12th. Or the middle of the week ending the 12th. And I read that note and I thought I no longer felt confident that to get a full understanding of what had happened on Newsnight would be possible to do inside the BBC. And I concluded from that I needed to move to an external investigation of an external review of what was happening on Newsnight.
Did you ever consider talking to Liz McKean and Myron Jones? These are ex-colleagues of yours.
They are ex-colleagues of mine, and I thought it was important in my position as the Director General to be able to maintain sufficient distance from any allegations people were making, any accounts people were giving, to be allowed to review them properly myself rather than being pulled into them, which is why I asked Mr Macquarie to have those conversations on my behalf.
But what about your news managers? What about Helen Bowden and her deputy? Well, it's their job, surely, to get to the bottom of this dispute very, very quickly.
My anxiety, and the reason I asked Mr Macquarie to do it, was that the journalists on Newsnight may have things to say about the overall chain of news management that they wouldn't feel able to say in news management. That's why I wanted to create a separate chance for them to do that.
So do you think that your news managers behave properly in this regard?
I wasn't in any sense making a judgment then about how they had behaved. I wanted to be absolutely clear to the people involved that they should have a chance to speak to somebody who would stand apart from the entire story on Newsnight. To the best of my recollection, it took place at a lunch, which was the Women in Film and Television lunch, on the 2nd of December, I think I'm right in saying. I saw Newsnight last night Panorama last night said that it was a 10-second conversation. I would find it very difficult to tell you how long the conversation was. The substance of the conversation was that Helen said to me, I wanted to tell you, this is to the best of my recollection, because this is a conversation a long time ago. I wanted to tell you that Newsnight are looking at Jimmy Savile, or investigating Jimmy Savile, and if it comes off, if it stands up, words to that effect, it may have an impact on your Christmas schedule. And I said, well, thanks for letting me know. Please update me. And what I meant by that was on whether or not it will be going ahead.
Was it normal for Helen Bowden to discuss Newsnight investigations with you?
No, relatively rare.
Right. So, what seriousness did you attach to what she said?
Well, I was grateful to her for giving me the heads up, but the key message I took away from the conversation was that it wasn't yet clear to Helen whether it was going to stand up or not, whether it was going to happen or not, and that was the key message I took away. If it stands up or if it goes ahead, that was the key burden of the conversation I took away. And
did you contact her again about it, or did she contact you to let you know that the programme wasn't going to go ahead?
No, we never spoke about it again. From which I inferred that the decision had been made not to proceed with it, which turned out to be the case.
Do you not, looking back on that, find that slightly strange? Because this was much changes at this late stage into December to a Christmas schedule, probably which has largely already been published. Would be quite a serious matter, and this programme, the Jimmy Savile tribute, the main tribute went out on Boxing Day, so it was a key part of the Christmas schedule. Would it not have been normal for you to have asked asked for more information, more updates?
Well, I wouldn't have had any qualms about about making any changes one might have needed to make to the Christmas schedule. These were standalone programmes; they weren't parts of series or anything. And the truth is, the schedule can be changed relatively easily. It happens relatively often that programmes are taken out for whatever reason, or and then put back in, or not put back in. So I didn't take away from the conversation any sort of technical challenge about the complexity of the Christmas schedule. I don't believe I did fail, but I believe that the system as a whole seems not to have got this right.
But you're quite a key part in that system, and this conversation you have with Helen Bowden, it's not like two producers having a chat over the water cooler. You've got two of the most senior people in the organisation talking about a Newsnight investigation into one of the most senior television personalities in the history of the BBC.
But it had for me the quality of a preliminary conversation. It needed the next stage, and if I had been told that they intended to proceed to transmission on such and such a date, I would have made sure I understood all the implications of it and acted accordingly, and that stage never came. As a journalist, you are privy to allegations of a great many kinds, and some of them work out and some of them don't. Some of them turn out to be true and some of them don't.
Three short final questions. Marion Jones and Liz McLean, are they carrying on working for Newsnight?
I understand Marion Jones is currently attached to Panorama and will be working on other panoramas now.
Right.
And Liz is still at Newsnight, as I understand.
Okay, not stepping aside to cooperate with the Pollard Review like Peter Rippon?
No, but Peter Rippon is right at the centre of this. Well, the reason Peter Rippon is... I've asked Peter Rippon to step aside because of my disappointment in the nature of the blog and the inaccuracies in the blog. And what he's going to do now he's stepped aside is concentrate on preparing for the Pollard Review. But can I just be clear? He hasn't stepped aside to prepare. He's stepped aside because I have got, in all fairness, to allow him to go into the Pollard Review with the best possible chance of being able to make his case and be vindicated about his case. That's the only fair thing to do in respect to the Pollard Review. And so I don't want to say anything else that might prejudice his prospects in that regard. But I asked him to step aside because of my disappointment with the...
Second of three final questions. Are you, as far as you're aware, both Marion Jones and Liz McLean Did they carry on working with Peter Rippon after Newsnight after he took this decision that they disagreed with?
Yes, they did.
So they carried on working, as far as you're aware, until the ITV programme?
Yes, that's absolutely my understanding.
Okay. And the third question, the one thing that's really unresolved in this is why Peter Rippon had a sudden change of mind. So the question that's unresolved is who sat on him, who helped change his mind. Have you come to any conclusions? Was it the director of news?
Is it not possible that he changed his mind?
But what would you think?
Well, from what I can see, he became more and more seized of the importance of the Surrey police investigation and the reasons for the police not proceeding and the CPS not proceeding on the basis of the information they had. And he became convinced that without that, he didn't have what he needed to make the story. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't need any external agency in the story for Peter Rippon to have changed his mind. But this, in the end, goes to this question of how do you assess and understand what is in an editor's mind in the process of making a decision like that. So I think the best shot we all have at understanding this is hearing what he has to say to the Pollard review.
I think one of the emails when Peter Rippon seemed to go cold on the story was aired on the Panorama last night. It was copied to Stephen Mitchell. Now, I don't know whether that was a routine copying, but do you know from what stage that Peter Rippon was in touch with Stephen Mitchell, Helen Bowden, and whether those conversations went further to Mark Thompson?
I don't have any awareness of whether they went further from Helen Bowden to Mark Thompson. My understanding is that conversations with Steve Mitchell took place I wouldn't be able to say exactly when they first took place, but there were a number of conversations during the production of that item. But I don't have any more detail than that, and all the detail we are gathering, we are now making available to the inquiry.
Given the importance of this, and there's only very relatively few individuals, just like the blog not raising any questions that seem to be obvious. I mean, this seems to be another example of an amazing lack of curiosity on the part of a journalist.
Well, on behalf of which journalist?
Well, you as a journalist and the BBC being full of journalists.
No, my key approach to this was to recognise that if all this was to have proper justice done to it, it would need to go into the independent inquiry, and it would not be appropriate for me to run an inquiry alongside that.